Hi all, I thought we could have a look at the very interesting encounter in round 3 between Peter Svidler and Vladimir Kramnik. So let's see what happened. Peter Svidler kicked off with c4, the English opening, and we have asymmetrical English. Vladimir replies c5, and the symmetry continues: knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, knight c6, g3, g6. This is one of the problems actually with the English opening that I experienced, that sometimes black can just imitate white for quite some time, but here white actually doesn't play bishop g2, which might lead to bishop g7, but instead breaks out in the center with d4. And structurally this changes the picture significantly, that white will enjoy pressure along the d file and black along the c file, with c4 as usually the exploitable target. But this pressure down the d file can be amplified by setting up a Maroczy bind later in some situations. Let's see what happened in this game. C takes d4, knight takes d4, and black usually plays bishop g7 here, bishop g2. This is quite well trodden territory. And now the most usual move is what Vladimir played, which is to take on d4. Here, knight takes d4 is the most common move, and the game continues. Queen takes d6. Queen now drops back to d3. This is actually the most common move as well, queen d3. Another alternative might be queen d2, but queen d3 by far the most popular with 926 games. So far very theoretically trodden. Black usually in this position plays a6. I have 406 games in the live book with a6, 183 with bishop f5, 89 with queen a5. But this move chosen by Vladimir comes off the beaten path quite significantly with bishop e6. Just to give you an example of the flavour of playing a6 here, the games continue like this sometimes. So black's playing for that b5 break, and that's the classic way of handling this position, going for that b5 queenside counterplay. Okay, so we see bishop e6, and let's put on a Kobitsa here. The first thing to notice is this b7 pawn. Let's try taking this. This wasn't played, but here rook b8, bishop could drop back, and from an engine perspective, after rook c8, actually picking on c4 here is annoying for white. If, for example, b3, then d5, this diagonal is also a bit of a liability right now. So, for example, c takes wouldn't be very nice after knight takes. Knight takes, we can just take here. So the c4 counterplay is very, very important here anyway. So even if that's a pawn sack temporarily, c4 here with the idea of d5 is very interesting. That will be good fun for black potentially, especially with this diagonal. So the pawn, after bishop e6, the pawn was ignored actually. White played bishop d2, so avoiding complications. Still a nice move. White wants to just establish maybe a bind on that d file pretty soon. Queen c8 though is not only attacking c4, it means actually the exchange of light square bishops is on the cards, and it also of course protects b7. So it seems very nice to do this, to exchange off white's prized possession in some respects, this bishop on g2 along that nice diagonal. And it also would of course weaken white's king slightly. So white has to react here to the c4 pawn though, and plays b3. So black now takes the opportunity to exchange off the light square bishops. And with this rook not moved, there's nothing really white can do about this. So rook ac1, and we see the bishops coming off. King takes. Okay, but still white has a slight nagging edge here. We see queen c6 check, f3, And now, interestingly, white perhaps wants to consolidate his space advantage by maybe playing something like knight d5 at some point. But black maybe doesn't like the look of knight d5 and created a slight concession here along that d file with the move e6, which structurally seems a little bit surprising. It does further weaken that d pawn. Is this going to be a massive target down the d file? The thing is, if we don't play e6 here, let's say black plays knight d7, which looks a bit more solid for that d6 pawn. Knight d5 is a bit of a nuisance. It actually threatens to win the queen straight off the bat. If we protect the e pawn, bishop c3, and now black's king safety is being called into question. If that exchange of dark square bishops there, things could get a bit nasty, or at least quite pleasant for white. Say queen takes here. This looks like a fairly pleasant position where black might have to end up playing e6 anyway here. That's actually the top engine choice. So e6 was actually played perhaps in, you could argue, more favourable circumstances here, without giving white that d5 square or access to the bishop just yet. But the d6 pawn is a target. Rook fd1, setting sights on d6 already. Rook ad8, and now directly putting enormous pressure on d6 from 3 pieces. Black doesn't really ever want to play e5. That would terribly weaken the d5 square, and that would be a horrible backward pawn. So say bishop g5, that would be a positionally dead, something you want to avoid like the plague. You wouldn't have much counterplay here if you give up the d5 square. It seems intuitive anyway. That seems pretty diabolical. So black plays rook d7 for the moment, relying tactically on a pin. If white plays bishop takes d6, then actually this should be okay for black. There's various moves apparently which are okay, including actually knight g4 using this pin, where black's going to be playing something like maybe bishop h6 later and creating some serious threats on e3 potentially. But there's also just b6, and okay, it's an extra pawn, but white is kind of stuck here. Say b4, bishop h6, and white's kind of stuck. It could actually lead white to a bit of trouble here, this pin as well. Say rook c2, knight g4, because of that pin as well, and e3. So white doesn't really want to take this pawn. White plays queen e3, not only eyeing a7, but also for bishop h6 that could be handy. And not only that, with the rook eyeing d6, maybe also knight b5 is going to be handy later. So here b6 is played, which also defends, of course, a7 to knight b5. That isn't so major. So b6 is a very nice move actually defensively. If knight b5 now, I think black possibly can afford now d5 or e5 even, because there might not be enough time to exploit the d5 square in this particular position. Black's going to liberate immediately with d5 here and should be okay. This is given about equal from the engine perspective. So b6, clever little move. White plays rook d3, so seemingly playing still simple chess against d6. Rook c8 was played. Queen d2. White is tripling on the d6 pawn, but first takes a precaution now with e4, trying to fix it down more. So the dreaded Moxie bind is set up against that d6 pawn. If white didn't play e4, say rook d1, this is interesting as well. It seems, you know, black's passive, but is it necessarily totally winning for white? I know it looks odd for me to see Vladimir Kramnik on this side of a structure instead of, say, the Slav defense or something more solid, you know, with a miserable d6 pawn. A lot of King's Indian players love to suffer like this with the d6 pawn. But to see Vladimir Kramnik with this is quite unusual, actually, an unusual viewing experience. So let's see what he does. So after e4, he plays actually now a6, and white does have good pressure and a nice potential pin on that d6 pawn, and uses that with e5. So black can't take without losing d7 here. So black now, though, plays h6 as though g5 and bishop takes e5 is on the cards. White prevents g5 with h4 and maintains that horrible pin on d6. So rook cd8. It seems, for the moment, black's counterplay is severely reduced, and white now triples on that poor d6 pawn. The suffering continues for black. Can black actually generate any counterplay? Will black dare to play now b5? Seems usually quite thematic, but here Pete Svidler plays, I think this is a fantastic move to create an advantage from this position. I wonder if you can guess it if I gave you 10 seconds here. For me, this is a great move. So 10 seconds starting from now, or you might want to pause the video. Okay, he plays c5, and this has implications for the black queen being harassed in certain variations. The first thing to note, if black reacts with d5, which might seem an idea for a French defense style structure, I think here b4, and then white's going to continue knight e2 to d4 with a significant edge. So let's get rid of black's threats first, and then I think white can continue with knight e2, and with a knight on d4, this c pawn, past c pawn, should be quite dangerous. So even if black gets that a file, this looks like a very nice position for white. So d5 doesn't seem that tempting to play d5 here. Vladimir actually takes with the queen here. He can't with the pawn because of the rook on d7, and here we have the queen is a subject of attack to knight e4. Very pleasant move, putting pressure also again on d6. Where does the queen go? Well, the queen actually went to b6 here, and this might not be the most accurate. Queen going to a7 might be interesting as well, though. It looks a bit odd just to go all the way back to a7. But even so, I think white still has tempo gains with bishop e3 on that queen. I'm just wondering, queen c6 though. E takes d6. Can white actually win this position that easily? In some respects, this might be safer just to put the queen on c6 and accept the loss of the pawn. Because the thing is, about queen b6, here there might have been a missed opportunity. There seems to be two different strong moves and whole philosophies to the position here, actually. They represent different philosophies. The first thing is, you can see that white's kind of geared up for d6 here, and this enormous pin. And so you might want to use this central pressure. Or the other philosophy is to go for black's king and sort of treat these pieces as slightly away from the king. And two very powerful moves highlighted by engines. Bishop e3, because this now affords, say, knight c5, using that pin. And this is very, very unpleasant, it seems, for black. If black is forced to lose the exchange, then this looks to be a near decisive advantage, and white can even go for the attack again. The other way is just to play bishop takes h6 here in this position. So after queen b6, just to play bishop takes h6, and although e5 is given up, now the move h5 is quite powerful, trying to tear open black's king. So these are two different approaches. It's not entirely conclusive though that black's king is in full meltdown here after, say, knight f6, knight takes, bishop takes. Say white plays bishop g5, trying to get rid of that key defender. Takes, takes. I think Vladimir, after the game, alluded that his rooks might be able to play a key defensive role here and might be able to survive. There's actually a very, very nifty move here, which, if you're human, would require a lot of bravery, but the engine suggests it as a way of trying to minimize the damage, a very key defensive move. So black is about to be wrenched apart at g6 here, but there's a key defensive move in this variation, which is rook c8. So after hg, it means that queen d8 is afforded, and if black loses the f7 pawn, then this position, it doesn't seem, I mean, it's equal on pawns, it doesn't seem entirely conclusive. Black's holding on for dear life here. So I'm not entirely convinced that this is that much more favourable, at least with current engine analysis and the engine power I have, that this bishop takes h6 is that more, from a scientific perspective, better than bishop e3 and knight c5. Even if the queen went to a7 again, we've got this bishop e3 idea here, and then knight c5. And this is actually reminiscent of the World Championship, one of the World Championship games last year, towards the end, between Magnus Carlsen and Vishy Anand, which I think Magnus was playing white and had this enormous pin on the d file, and apparently could have put the game away quite easily with that pin on the d file. It seems, you know, if white's spent so much time setting up this triple pressure on the d file, then in a way, to choose between the two, it seems that bishop e3 is in some ways to be preferred. There's an argument for preferring this method, using that pin. How does black kind of avoid this? It's difficult to consider. Say queen b8, knight c5 again. The problem is here, rook c7, you know, knight takes a6, horrible. Rook a7, just e takes d6 is even more powerful because of d7 here. The knight's fantastic on c5. So that's interesting that actually bishop e3 looks quite crushing, but it wasn't played. Instead, knight takes d6 was played, which is tempting as well. It does win a pawn concretely. Bishop f8. There's a kind of pin backfire on white though here, that this knight is not moving away now, except tactically it does have a move. It doesn't seem to have too many moves, but it does have two moves which could have been useful here. Peter Svidler actually played h5, so he's trying to get into black's king safety, cause some king safety issues. Knight c4 or knight c8, they're interesting to consider attacking the queen, but the thing is, you have to sort of evaluate if this ending is actually absolutely winning or not, with white not even, so 1 2 3 4 5 6 1 2 3 4 5 6, not even a pawn up, but it's only a small advantage for white if any. But anyway, that's to be considered. So it looks as though the worst is over for black, in fact, if that's white's technically the best move. White plays h5, at least for the moment anyway. It seems black here has kind of virtually equalized in some respects. Now black played knight takes, and we see e takes, and now g5, bishop e5, and now Vladimir plays rook c8, so he sets up a blockade on that d6 pawn. White's extra pawn is not doing too much at the moment. Has black got any counterplay? Well, black can try and kind of undermine that pawn with bishop g7, that sort of thing. So rook c1 was played, rook takes c1, queen takes. And now we see queen b7, and all of a sudden g4 has emerged as something of interest to black, and white prevents that with actually playing g4 himself. Now white tries to freeze the queen side pawns with white's potentially threatening. No, white's not actually threatening too much on the queen side. Pardon me. So black here plays b4, giving himself queen b5. So getting a bit of space there, sealing down actually these two pawns. But it does give up that weakness of the last move. It does give up the c4 square, and white seizes the opportunity to play queen c4. Here again, white's actually getting a little bit more advantage. There's a small advantage accumulation which has seemed to have occurred here. Bishop g7, and the bishop drops back, maintaining the tension here. And Vladimir here at move 35 played queen b5. And this is a very, very committal decision in some respects. Although it's not obvious, it seems as though this would have been another great opportunity for a significant advantage for white based on the b4 pawn. And there's a bit of mystery here from the engine views. I'd like to show you that queen takes b5. There's a mysterious move played here in light of black potentially trying to reduce the scope of this bishop by playing f5, f4. But there's another point to it. It's not just that. If we go for the b4 pawn here straight away, I'm not entirely sure that's at all the problem for black, because of bishop c3. So we're stuck. We're just going to end up undoubling black's pawns and losing d6. And this position seems to be about equal. There's not much going on at all. So. But there is a move here, a key move, which engines like, and I think it's quite fascinating, that it is to do about b4, but to make this attack on b4 more effective. Very, very subtle stuff. To play f4, and the idea is to create a target out of h6 first, and then be able to drop the bishop back to make bishop c3 less effective. For example, g takes, bishop takes. We're eyeing h6, and we can drop back for bishop d2. So in this position, this is actually quite difficult for black. If he plays, okay, let's say black played bishop f8, then we don't go for b4 just yet. But I think even the king though can start walking across. So bishop e5, and maybe the king starts walking across the board. I think just b4 is a bit of a problem. Maybe rook d4 even immediately to take that, knowing that bishop takes d6, there'll be rook d4 as a pin. For example, king h7, rook d4, and then we can win safely b4. Doesn't matter about d6 here because of rook d4. So it seems technically that maybe like another slight weakness is created on h6. So by playing f4, this stuff becomes possible. But so it seems as though queen b5 might have been a bit overly committal for this endgame. It might not be entirely safe, this endgame. But the opportunity here was not taken. Instead, bishop e1 was played, and this allows Vladimir, quite a resourceful move, just queen e5 hitting the bishop on e1. And if white disastrously plays queen c6, then queen takes e1, and then queen e2 would win the rook on d3. So the bishop goes to g3, and we see queen e2 check. And here it looks as though black's created something he didn't have before. This active queen, aggressive queen. Bishop f8. Now the d6 pawn is picked on, but the a6 pawn is there for the taking. And white does take on a6, and here it looks as though at least from an engine perspective, that if black wanted to just try and draw this comfortably, it seems queen e5, just get rid of the d6 pawn, because if bishop g3 with the queen blocked by his own rook, queen e2 check is going to be a seesaw kind of draw. But no, Vladimir actually played a more interesting move here. He played e5, and that's got the intention to undermine this pawn chain and weaken white's king with the move e4. So things have got interesting here. Is it a bit of a double-edged attempt to potentially create winning chances for black, or is it just, well, I think that's going too far. I think black just wants to get perpetual check time. I think that's the main motivation. So white played queen c4, locking down, it seems, against e4. Black now snaps up the a2 pawn. So they've both been snapping their opposing a pawns. And okay, here, if white plays queen takes b4, that seems actually pliable, and it holds d6. Is it a decisive advantage? Not entirely sure. Here it seems d6 is in trouble anyway, and it's going to be taken, and it doesn't seem as though, although e5 now dropping might again give white an advantage. So these are difficult positions indeed. White actually played a very, very tempting move, queen c6, and it basically creates an only move situation now for black. This is a really critical position for black to either get destroyed or still try and equalize. If the rook moves back, then d7, and white is now threatening queen f6 or queen c7 or queen b6 even, just to get rid of that rook to try and queen the pawn. And this looks terminal almost. If bishop g7, for example, queen b6, queen a8, and in fact here the blockade can be lifted, queen takes, bishop b6, going to be the exchange up with winning position. Okay, so this d pawn is extremely dangerous. Black hasn't got time to move that rook, and strikes back with a fantastic move. And here it looks as though Kramnik has turned into Houdini or something. He's playing like the top, like engine moves all of a sudden. It's a very, very difficult position. He has to play with huge precision here to be able to remain equal. Can you guess what black played here? I'll give you 10 seconds starting from now. Okay, he plays e4, counter-attacking the white rook. If queen takes e4, I don't think that's a problem at all for black. Just rook takes d6. So white actually plays f takes, which gives him rook f3, looking at f7. That seems mega dangerous for black, though. But queen e2 was the point to try and open up and create some king safety issues around white's king. But rook f3 seems like comfortably defending g4 and eyeing f7. So what's going on here? Black though can take on d6, and he did. Queen e8 hitting f7. Not too many choices here for black. It seems f6 is the only move, even though it looks horrible to allow queen g6. This is harmless here. It wasn't played. I think what happens here, the white rook is a bit stuck because of this g4 issue, the e4 issue. Well, not the e4 issue, the g4 issue in particular. And also the black rook is well placed in the centre now. So no, white actually plays, so after f6, a fantastic move. So credit for both players in this game for being extremely resourceful. Can you guess what white played here if I gave you 10 seconds starting from now? Okay, white plays e5. and he doesn't fear if black didn't play this. If black played queen takes, then there's a very nice forcing sequence: queen takes, f takes, rook takes f8, king takes, bishop c5, king protects, and now white takes the time to celebrate the pin with bishop takes b4, which leads to a winning king and pawn ending. Because it's an outside pass pawn here, so the white king just goes here, and black is just run out of moves. It's too far. If he goes there, he's going to lose all his pawns, and like this, he's just run into Zugzwang because white just uses the b pawn to distract. So that ending is to be avoided like the plague. So Vladimir plays another fantastic move here, computer-like move actually. I'm really shocked actually myself by this whole sequence now. It seems yeah, Vladimir Kramnik's turned into a computer. Can you guess what black plays here? If I gave you 10 seconds in this position. Okay, black plays f5, and okay, if rook takes f5, then I think it's perpetual check time. Queen takes g4 check, 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 just keeps perpetual checking. So that's ruled out. Rook takes f5. So white plays g takes f5, and now I think one of the most remarkable idea now tactically, because white would seem to have these two very dangerous connected pass pawns here, threatening things like e6 and f6. So seems quite a dangerous state of affairs really, with that f7 square being celebrated by e6, or f6 again is dangerous for queen g6 and stuff like that. But black comes up with another fantastic move. In the circumstances, the only move you could call it. I think I'll just show you this one. Rook f6, so using that pin on the e pawn, safeguarding f7, blocking against f6, and here e6 I think doesn't really do anything. Black has also now got, by the way, pawn mobility here, so e6, queen e4 actually threatens g4, winning an entire rook. This just shows that all the dynamic possibilities after rook f6, they're vanishing for white. So this is starting to get, how does white do anything? He played actually king g3, but now queen e4 has queen h4, and white now plays bishop c5. We have perpetual check, potentially. Bishop f2, queen e4, perpetual threats, queen h4, and then after queen e1, bishop f2. Both players agreed a draw. So I thought the game was interesting to see Vladimir Kramnik suffering with that d6 pawn, like a lot of King's Indian players over the years. And also the amazing tactical resourcefulness shown to maintain equality. I think a fantastic game from both sides. Comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.